Hey, Sean, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Been a good time off for you a little bit?
Yeah, it's been nice. I mean, I'm really excited to get back to calling fights, but it's always good to not have to travel so much too. So it's been good.
Yeah, I get that. So I guess I want to ask, you're going to be a judge for this Challenger Series coming up, or how you're just going to call the fights?
Yeah.
Okay. So how much work goes into preparing to call a fight for this for somebody who maybe has obviously very rare that any of us have the chance to call a fight? What kind of work goes into that?
Well, it's the fun stuff, right? When you know what the matchup's going to be, you watch as much as you can find on both fighters for the Challenger Series. That's usually somewhat limited, although even regional promotions are doing a really good job of putting out their content and making it available on YouTube and stuff. Obviously for our PFL regular season fighters, some of the more well-known names, there's a ton of stuff to watch on them, right? We do interviews with each fighter. I just finished a bunch just like a few minutes ago for the Challenger Series guys, where you get kind of their game plan, you get their what they're willing to share of their game plan, you get how training has been going in their own words, and you try and start to piece the story together just a little bit with what you know about them, what they tell you about themselves, and obviously we have discussions as a production team, as a broadcast team about like what we think is the most likely outcome, what we think the real story with this individual is. So there's a little bit of homework, but it doesn't feel like work because it's watching fights, which we all love to do.
You mentioned the game plans about how much they're willing to give you. And I know obviously with the media, that makes sense. They don't want to tell us too much because we're going to put this out. Do you do you kind of think it's silly that they're not like revealing a little bit more to you? It's like, I'm on your side. What am I going to say? Do you think I'm going to go to your opponent or
Well, I understand, right? Because when you're a fighter, you don't know what the relationship is, right? Like, I mean, Randy Couture is part of our broadcast team, right? Randy is an amazing guy. Randy's an amazing person. He also owns a gym that like someone on every card trains at, right? So if you're one of the opponents, you're someone who's fighting against an extreme couture guy. I can understand the reluctance to reveal my game plan to Randy. Now, Randy would never, under any circumstance, like be cheat on behalf of a fighter just because he wouldn't go, hey, guess what they're going to do. Randy wouldn't do that. But I understand with how much is at stake for some of these individuals, how much hard work goes into preparing. You don't want to let anything potentially create an advantage for your opponent. So even though I do chuckle at it, I also kind of understand because when I was a fighter myself, I was like, man, how much do I really want to let this person know? Because if they're friends with the coach on the other side, or they've trained with that guy, they've never trained with me, maybe they want to see them win. Maybe they wouldn't feel bad about sharing a secret or two. Kenny, Randy, and myself would never do that, but fighters don't know that until they get to know us better.
right? That makes sense. Have you ever had a moment where somebody's telling you their game plan and you in your mind you're like, that's a terrible game plan, don't do that, and you want to say like, this is what you should do, and obviously you can't say that either. Have does that happen often?
It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And I actually, in last season, in one of our playoff fights, I had this exact experience, not talking to the fighter, but trying to pick the brain of one of the fighter's coaches. And and this is a highly respected coach in the sport of mixed martial arts, like a legendary name in coaching. And what this person was telling me about what they expected from the opponent, I was like, did you not watch any of the opponent's fights? That's not who that is. That's not who your fighter is fighting. Like, and it was really confusing to me. I was like, how does someone with this reputation on this level get what I thought to be so wrong, right? Like, how are you this far off of what, you know, anyone who's watched that other person fight knows about? And it's just, I don't know how you really explain it. It does happen though, where fighters, and I've been guilty of it myself. in the past, right? As a fighter, where you think you know what they're going to bring and then they don't. They're completely different. Your best information is from 2 years ago or something like that, or they fought that way because their opponent in that fight was good at something that you're not good at. So they adjusted their game plan for that person, but they're not going to adjust their game plan that way for you. But it does happen. It's not super common, but when it does happen, you almost like you have to fight the urge to be like, well, you know that this guy is really good at jujitsu, right? Or something like that, instead of just letting him ride with it. Because again, it's unfair to try and alter. You got to observe, but not try and like affect the outcomes in any way.
You don't have to tell me who it was, but did that fighter lose?
Yes.
Oh, because of that reason, you think?
I don't not no not be not because of that reason, not directly at least. But they did lose, and it was one of those things where the circumstance you would never, if you heard the conversation that I had, you would never like, oh, that's exactly why that person lost. But it wasn't an incredible leap to be like, something was off with the way that you were game planning. So I don't know. It was a really odd situation. I'll remember it for the rest of my career because it's going to alter the way that I look at that coach forever.
Right. And one thing too, same with media, we meet the fighters, we get a sense of their personality, and sometimes we like a fighter or sometimes we don't like a fighter for whatever reason, just from a personal standpoint. That's something that the fans don't usually get to see. How hard is it to kind of separate that when you're calling the fight, either in a positive or a negative way?
Yeah, I don't know if all the fighters like me. I generally, have some affection, or like not the same for every person, but like I feel like I get to know them through this process. I feel like I'm kind of rooting for everyone, even two fighters that I like fighting against one another. Last year's welterweight championship, Delano Taylor had a great story. I feel like Delano, he kept the walls up with us on the broadcast team for a little while, but I finally started like I got to know him. I feel like I got to know him a little bit. I was rooting for him to be successful. And he was fighting Sada Busi, who I absolutely love. And I consider him a friend, you know what I mean? So my only real awareness is I got to make sure that when I'm on the call, it's not like I'm rooting for one guy or the other, or I'm not like I'm pushing one guy's agenda over the other guy's agenda. And we've been accused of that. And I've gone back and listened to fights and sometimes kind of seen the point of the criticism, and other times been like, "What are you talking about?" I called that one right down the middle. But it's easier than people probably think to compartmentalize, because when you've been part of the sport for as long as I have, you know that like the fight tells the truth. At the end of the day, if you love this person, all of us wanted to see Shogun Hua go out in his UFC career with a big win. Every one of us wanted to see it, right? That broadcast team wanted that to be a storybook ending in Brazil, but they called it the right way. Mm-hmm. Because like, even though you didn't want that outcome to happen, the fight tells the truth. He's too old. He's too slow. He doesn't have it anymore. And it ended up being a coming out party for his opponent instead of a happy ending for him. That's not what any of us wanted to see, but you just got to ride with it.
And getting back to a little bit about your preparation, are you calling all 8 weeks in a row?
Oh, yeah.
So how do you, because I know with me, I don't start to prep for the next show until the first one's over, but my prep is not going to be like your prep. So how do you kind of compartmentalize each week and not get them all mixed up and have a life?
I compartmentalize them. I don't. It's funny because our production team is so good at their job, right? They make sure we have all the information we need as far ahead of time as possible. They give us the first version of the fight card, second version of the fight card, the 8th version of the fight card, like however many times things change, they're giving us that information. And I feel kind of bad because sometimes I'm like, dude, this is 3 weeks away. I don't need to know right now, because I don't want to have my film study on the heavyweights interfere with my memory or something that I've really like taken note of on the welterweights, who we start with, right? So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I I've done it this my whole life, right? I was that kid in school who crammed the night before for the test and somehow managed to get usually an A minus at least. So I'm uh I'm doing that with my fights. Like after we do the first week of Challenger Series, I'll get home on Saturday. I'll, do what I got to do, living the dad life, living the husband life, knock the honeydew list off. And when everyone goes to bed, I'll be watching fights from the guys who are on the next week.
You mentioned Delano Taylor. Is there anybody on this first week that you think has that Delano Taylor quality of being able to make a win and then go all the way to the finals this year? Just on week
Well,
one.
man, the welterweights have been kind of the class of the PFL in general, right? Our regular season welterweight roster has been our best and deepest roster. Our PFL Challenger Series alum at welterweight were, I think, the best. You had a bunch of Jarrah Salawi was amazing. Carlos Leal was a really good fighter. Obviously, Delano Taylor. And those are just the guys who you got to see in the regular season. There were other guys on that card who were really dang good. And I think it's that way again this year. I think welterweight is just a particularly deep weight class in MMA, and for us in the PFL, there's a guy who's Georgian, like country of Georgia, Itzo Babelaidze, who you saw on our. He did a showcase fight in New York for us. He was on the Challenger Series last year. He's an incredible athlete. He's got power in both hands. He's a good wrestler. He's a scary dude, and I think that he could really be something. Now, his pro record is still like he's limited. He doesn't have a whole bunch of fights, but he's got a really incredible skill set. And I've had my eye on him since we saw him on the first Challenger Series opportunity that he had, because it might not be 2023, but at some point everyone's going to know his name.
Yeah, he was actually our fighter to watch. So I'm glad we have the same mindset going in there. Those
All
Georgian,
right,
that Georgian blood is something special. It's right up there with the Dagestani blood.
man. That whole region, right? It's a different way of life. It's a hard scrabble way of life, right? The culture of like, don't be sitting around watching TV, get off your butt, go do like all this stuff. They start wrestling when they're 3 years old and all that. I mean, it lends itself to success in this sport. And I have made this point many times, but if you look at the top of the PFL, we had no American champions last season. None, right? Now that's great because this is a global sport. But also if you're an American fighter, you're like, wait a second, are we falling behind? Right? Like regionally, culturally, whatever, are we not? I mean, this is still where people flood to get the training and the nutrition and the excellent coaching and all that kind of stuff. But look at the number one prospects and all the ranked fighters in pretty much every weight class and tell me how many of the rising stars are Americans. It used to be everybody. When this sport was in its infancy and it was an American thing, it used to be everybody. Now, the Americans are not representing as universally as they used to, and that's something that American fighters should be paying attention to.
And I guess my last question for you, it's going to be the fun one you're going to hear all week, I'm sure. Retirement. Everybody, all the MMA fighters retire and then come back and retire and come back. Do you ever get the urge to come back?
I get very mild urges, right? When I watch light heavyweights, which is where I competed, that are competing, they're, at the high level, they're fighting for a championship, that are fighting to contend for a championship. And I see them and I'm like, I could probably beat that guy. Now that's maybe delusional, but you're allowed when you're 4 years removed from your last fight to be a little bit delusional about what you're capable of. But every time I get one of those urges, it is tempered by watching Glover Teixeira, the performance that he just had, by watching guys like Shogun, who I have an immense amount of respect for, but are only a year or two older than me, right? I am self-aware enough to know that I'm not getting stronger, I'm not getting faster, I'm not getting better cardio at this point. So if anyone ever wants me to come off the couch or take off the headphones and get the mic out of my face and not announce fights anymore, the price just continues to go up. And there doesn't seem to be a super high demand to watch Sean O'Connell fight anymore, which is, I don't know, somewhat insulting, but also a relief, because if it was a constant temptation, I was getting a bunch of offers, you probably would see me make the bad decision to come back and fight. For the right amount of absurd money, I would do it, but that ain't coming.
So to fight Jake Paul, you'd come back?
Absolutely. And and not for the same reason that other people want to fight Jake Paul, right? There's a bunch of people who want to fight Jake Paul because, yeah, you want to get that huge payday, but also because they're like, I want to show everyone that this dude's an imposter, right? I look at what Jake Paul has done in his boxing endeavors, and I look what Jake Paul is doing right now as a partner in the PFL and, you know, dabbling in MMA. And I have like a kind of like jealous, twisted admiration for it. And that's why I would want to fight Jake Paul. Be like, look, you don't want to fight like the biggest name in the world in your first MMA fight. He probably believes he does, but the reason I would want to fight would be like, I'm a name that is respectable enough that getting in there with me would be considered a real fight. I think people would view it that way, right? And so for him, he's in this really weird place where his first fight can't be against a bum or a scrub that nobody's ever heard of because he's too famous, right? And if he gets in there with anyone who's still on a championship contending level or in the prime of their career, he's going to get worked. And that's not good for his career. And that's not good for the perception of, you know, his co-branding or anything like that. So for those reasons, a Jake Paul fight would be appealing, but not because I want to be like, oh yeah, this guy's some stupid YouTuber. He's proven to us enough times that he's taken it seriously. Like, I know it's annoying to people, but he's got the resources, he's got the time, he trains very hard, and he's done a good job of developing skill sets in boxing that at least make him respectable. Does that translate into MMA with his wrestling background? Probably, but we will see. I'm excited for it whenever it happens, his MMA debut. I don't think it'll be against me, but I would be happy to welcome the young man to the sport of mixed martial arts with an informative lesson about what it really takes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Have a
thanks
good
for having me.
season.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.